Tonight, a 310-mile border separates us from the Republic, but how big is the knowledge gap?
When I came here, it took me a while to figure it out, but now I've been here 4 years and I can't really see myself leaving.
Well, the big question, I suppose, is do we really know each other at all?
I'll be asking my panel if people in the Republic understand us as much as they could or should. And Lough Neagh has been blighted by a blue-green algae for 2 summers now. I've been speaking to the minister responsible for fixing it.
I cannot look farmers in the eye and say to them that I want to look towards taking actions around agricultural runoff, whilst NI Water have a separate regulatory regime, and I want to call time on that.
Hello. Friday evening's announcement on city deals and on Casement Park prompted many to wonder about the UK government's commitment to Northern Ireland. For some, it was just another signal that it's time to look to Dublin for the answer. But just how well do people from the Republic understand the rhythms of everyday life here in Northern Ireland? Shortly, I'll discuss the big talking points with my studio panel. But first, we sent Darren Marshall off to gather some opinions.
I've always said it, like, the South needs to pay a little bit more attention to the goings on of the nuances, the daily life up here. They just hear the headlines. They don't actually see what it actually has to offer away from politics and stuff, you know.
Andrew Ryan, host of Cork in the North podcast, and for those not familiar with it, you're from Cork. Yeah. You're in the North. What do you make of life up here?
Life is good. 4 years I've been here now. I'll be honest with you, when I moved over, I didn't think I was going to like it, because growing up in Cork, I would have had an impression of the North based on the news on the way to school, in the car in the morning, listening to the radio. But when I came here, it took me a while to figure it out, but now I've been here 4 years and I can't really see myself leaving.
What was your biggest misconception about this place?
That if you were from the South, that you would be disliked. When I live in a British area now, and I've never felt more welcome. They're so nice, so polite. I'm marrying a girl from here who comes from the British side, and absolutely, I wouldn't bat an eyelid about anything. We're all from the same island. We all have different ways of growing up and different experiences on this really small island. But when you speak to the people on a one-to-one level, they're as nice as anybody else. I don't look at people as, oh my God, you're different because you're up there in the 6 counties and stuff like that. I just look at them as like, oh, you're from Ireland as well? Okay, cool. But I might be British, I might be Irish, I might be French, you might be Polish. We're all living on the island, so let's all get on.
Sometimes people can tend to think, when you're talking about Northern Ireland, when it's in the news, oh, it'll be something related to the Troubles, or it's something related to Stormont collapsing, for example. It did surprise me when I was working as a journalist in the South that, as I've said, perhaps the extent of the pressures across the health service hadn't cut through in the South. Since Brexit, maybe people realised that there are maybe things about the North that they don't know. And I do think that there is a bit more of a desire and a bit more of an acknowledgement that the more that we all know about each other, that's just going to benefit everyone, I think. Just having that information and having a bit more knowledge about how both sides of the border, how daily life is, I think that is going to be helpful for everyone.
Mark, is there a knowledge gap here? Do people down here know enough about Northern Ireland?
There's a huge knowledge gap, and in many cases there isn't necessarily an interest in finding out more about it. The old story in the Republic during the Troubles was that 3/4 of people in the Republic had never been across the border, and 3/4 of those who had never wanted to go back. Now, 25 years on, 26 years on, after the Good Friday Agreement, the level of knowledge that we have about the other is better in some cases, but it's not fundamentally transformed in any shape or form.
As people talk more about the constitutional future of this island, is there more of a curiosity about life on the other side of the border?
Yes, there's more of a curiosity at some levels among certain groups, but is it one that you could start a pub conversation in every town and village in the Republic? No, you couldn't. They'd wonder why you were being a bit odd in bringing it up, perhaps. But, you know, if you look at the political system, if you look at officialdom, if you look at people who are in industry, trade has ballooned in the last 30 years. So there's no doubt that there are greater connections. People can see the conversation taking place about a united Ireland. They don't believe it's happening tomorrow. In fact, if you wanted to scare the living daylights out of people in the Republic, you'd have Simon Harris appearing on the steps of government buildings and saying that he's spoken to Keir Starmer and they've both agreed that we're going to have a referendum next year. 2/3 of people are in favour, consistently, plus or minus, of a united Ireland. And yet their reaction to being faced with the realities that would have to be dealt with were a united Ireland to happen, the flag, the anthem, devolved Stormont or whatever, then the support falls away. So, you know, it support's a mile wide but an inch deep.
How much do people down here know about Northern Ireland?
Well, the big question, I suppose, is do we really know each other at all? You know, some of our data shows that the Northerners would know the Southerners and the South far better than Southerners would know Northern Ireland. So maybe 1 in 5 Southerners would have a relative in Northern Ireland, and 2/3 have no friends there, and over half haven't been in Northern Ireland in the last 5 years. And on all of those, Northerners would visit here more frequently, would have more friends here, and would have relatives here. So the big question is, do we really know each other?
Is it just that they don't necessarily want to know about life in Northern Ireland, or they're just too busy with their own lives to worry about life in Northern Ireland, or what do you think is the reason for that?
I suppose the data doesn't show that. We have run events as part of Aaron's where you might get an idea for that, where there are Northerners who've moved down here, and the things that they report. First of all, they say we've been made really welcome here, but they will then say, oh, we've been recommended that you might change your accent at work just to fit in a little more. Or somebody might say, somebody else reported that they weren't considered really Irish. And I guess perhaps it's the legacy of the Troubles.
Is there a thirst for knowledge down here about life in Northern Ireland, how things operate up there?
There's massive interest in it. It's remarkable. When we set up this project, we didn't anticipate how organic it would be and how it would grow and how many people would read our articles and podcasts and blogs. Like, it is quite extraordinary that there's a lot of thirst to understand Northern Ireland, to understand how we and the North could interoperate.
As someone who now calls this place home,
Yeah.
sell it to people in the Republic.
2 airports in Belfast, good golf, sound people, 15s.
Darren Marshall asking the questions. Let's expand on some of the issues raised there. With me now are Professor Pete Shirler from the University of Liverpool, the commentator Chris Donnelly, the Lyric Theatre's executive producer Jimmy Fay, who's originally from Tallaght, and joining us from her home in Dublin is the Tyrone-born Fine Gael Senator Emer Curry. Welcome to all of you, and thanks very much indeed for joining us. We'll maybe come on to the 15s in due course. But Emer Curry, I want to start with you. You were born in Dungannon, you grew up in the Republic. Is this a conversation that needs to be happening in your view?
Yes, I think it's a very good conversation to be happening, and it does need to be happening. I've said in this programme before that I do think that there is a disconnect, North and South, and that needs to be bridged. We need common ground. But yes, there are big knowledge gaps about day-to-day life, as your report suggests. There's misperceptions about life, North and South. So I think, yeah, definitely we should be having this conversation.
What are your personal experiences as a Northerner living in the Republic of Ireland for quite a number of years now? I mean, we hear those stories reported in that piece we've just seen. People from the North being told that to fit in properly, they really should be changing their accent. Does that shock you? Did you ever come in contact with anything like that yourself?
I think it wouldn't be the norm. So as a politician, for instance, one of the things we do, Mark, I know, is knock on thousands and thousands of doors. And over the last 6 years as a public rep, my Northern accent has never once, been an issue. In fact, I think there's a lot of affection for people from the North. Now, I will say that sometimes Northerners think I have a Dublin accent, but I can tell you that in Dublin I do have a Northern accent. I'm very proud of it. But no, it's never come up as an issue. But yes, you do hear now and again things like that coming up. I experienced it once in my professional life, where I had an opinion and I used it, and I was referred to as being a Northern woman. So you do come across issues like that now and again. But in general, I think there's a huge amount of affection for Northerners and interest.
And Jimmy Fay, you're from Dublin, as I said in the introduction. You came to live in Belfast, I think it was about 10 years ago. How big a challenge was that for you?
Well, I was thinking about it when you asked me to come on the programme. It wasn't a huge challenge because I got the job of my dreams running the Lyric Theatre. It's an absolutely extraordinary theatre and it's an amazing place to work, But when I moved up first, I wondered if I'd survive a year. And then I'm here 10 years now, I had a young son who was 7, had to bring him up, find a schooling for him. He'd been in an Educate Together school, which is a secular school in Dublin. And suddenly we had to pick a kind of a school to get him into. And that was awkward, and kind of going back and looking at that kind of being kind of tribalized a little bit. I found very, very awkward initially. But I've never really thought about it since. The people I work with are from all different denominations and stuff like that. And it's a fantastic place to live. It's a great standard of living. It's the people are really kind. We have amazing neighbours. And I've never had any problem at all. I was just wondering, though, the one time I think somebody said to me once that you're a Mexican, and I didn't understand what that meant, but it meant south of the border. And actually, I looked at it as a term of affection,
Did you? Sometimes people from the north who go to live in the Republic are referred to as Nordies, and I know that can get their hackles up. The Mexican label didn't annoy you. Can I ask you about that son that you mentioned, Daniel? I think he's now about 18, isn't he? And I remember you saying to me not very long ago, he is clear that Belfast is his home. And, if you and your wife, Amanda, talk about moving back to Dublin, Daniel doesn't want anything to do with it.
No, he's a Nordie, all right. Like he is, he's 17 actually, and he's very determined to stay in Belfast. He wants to go to Queen's when he's done his A-levels and stuff, and we'll see if that happens. Fingers crossed, But no, when he moved up, he met a bunch of people, and he's been friends, with people for a long, long time here now. So he's spent his entire youth here.
And can I just ask you, before we hear from the others around the table, your friends and professional colleagues in Dublin and elsewhere in the Republic of Ireland, what do they make of the life you have made for yourself in Northern Ireland? Do you think, do they understand it? Are they a little bit jealous of it, some of them?
I think they're jealous of, there's only 3 producing houses on the island of Ireland, the Abbey, the Gate and the Lyric, I don't think anybody's jealous. I think they're very happy for me. I think they think it's great. And when I come up and visit, they find Belfast to be a fantastic place. The one thing I do want to say is just growing up, when, back in the 90s and the 80s, Northern Irish theatre had a huge influence on me. Pentecost by Stuart Parker. You had people, there was something like 5,000 students from the north in Trinity back in the 80s. That's dwindled down to about 418. We've made it much harder for people to go from north to south, in terms of that student thing and to make the lives there. But people like Lynn Parker and, people like that have made extraordinary careers down south. Andrea Irving, who's playing Mo Molan, I think, she's East Belfast and has made a huge career in Dublin. So that thing has always been there. There's always been an interest for me and my generation in Northern Irish theatre and Northern Ireland in general.
Well, that's interesting that's what's happening in the cultural world. Pete Shirler, you're part of the Aaron's research panel that was referred to in that report we saw earlier. What's your assessment of how much of a knowledge gap there is? Emer's already says she believes that there is a gap and that there is a disconnect. Is that your view as well?
Well, I think Ireland's got a big population. It's got many different types of people, and there are people who are more interested than others. I think interest has increased because of the Good Friday Agreement. Clearly, government, public sector links, art links, business links. We're living in a very different world from when Paisley was throwing snowballs at Sean Lamass outside Stormont. But I think one of the things that's actually interesting is the Civic Safe Base project, which Chris was also involved in. One section is pro-union, one section is pro-unity. We had well over 1/3 viewers. 6 times more likely if you're in the south to read the Unionist section than to read the Nationalist section, which I think is very interesting, you know, this desire. And over the last few years, we've done this thing in the Republic where we've done Mentimeter. You vote in your vote at an event, and we ask questions, what do you know about Northern Ireland? And what it came across overwhelmingly was Southerners knew the negative things about Northern Ireland, but when you pointed out things like Belfast is the 7th best economy, when you pointed out it's the main centre for investment in the UK, growth in the UK, all these positive things, they had a negative attitude. So it proved the power of doing that, because you were able then to have a more mature conversation about what actually is the North. And then what came out of that was a very clear thing, which was like the North's just somewhere far away for us. It's not somewhere we really know. And eventually, as you went further down towards Cork and Limerick, down that part, they really just thought of us, we weren't orange and green. We were these people up in a corner. And very good luck to you, and stay away from us.
Oh, so just another place, a place apart.
Well, I think you know, you got a mixture of things like, you know, me and my family went up to Belfast, took the kids, W5, brilliant place, cheap weekend. You wouldn't get that in Dublin, it'd be too expensive. So you got that. You got the look, we just don't want you guys down here. We wish you the best, but we just don't want you down here. And then you also got people who were saying, well, you know, if the North's, you know, actually doing better than we thought, then maybe United Ireland's not a bad idea. So to have one size fits all answer to that question is impossible because of the diversity of people in the south and their interests and knowledge levels.
I suppose that is a fair point, isn't it, Chris? That Northerners are not monolithic, and you know, Southerners are not monolithic either. Is this a conversation that can sometimes frustrate nationalists, because nationalists going south feel they're in the same country, but for Southerners coming north, they often feel that they're going to a different country. I mean, is that the reality?
I think, firstly, it's an important discussion. It's an interesting one. But I take the view people are people. And what that means is that people, in the first instance, are concerned about what involves them, their daily lives, their family, their surroundings. So if their environment is what's around them and somewhere else exists up the road that's different for them, then it's a place apart. It's a place of difference. So obviously what we've had, the troubles and the post-troubles, and really I think some of the difficulties about attracting people to the North is, what do we have to offer that's bringing people up here? We talked about maybe, the guy said in the video about 2 airports. Well, more than likely people from here are going to Dublin to get on a flight because they have a greater range of places to travel to. So I think part of the difficulty is that, but you know what?
You think 15s are a big draw?
Perhaps they could be potato bread and soda bread, the likes. But I think on a serious point, yeah, we up here, we're the contested entity. So people from a unionist background sometimes have a sense the British, you know, don't feel we're part of who they are. And I think one of the benefits, obviously, to people that benefits people from a nationalist background have, I think they could be more confident, because in the end of the day, they're on the island of Ireland. I am, without a shadow of a doubt, I'd say I'm as Irish as anybody from the rest of the island. I have history on my side, of culture. I've held a lot of the institutions, hell, even the Grand Orange Lodge is an All-Ireland institution. The current All-Ireland champions in senior football are Armagh. So there are a lot of the institutions that are island-wide. And whatever about maybe somebody from Cork saying something, or in fact, Jimmy, you said you're from Tala. Shamrock Rovers fans come up to the Brandywell, they're going to be slagging the team from Derry City that they're British, and they're like, it's a football slagging, you know. So that type of thing will happen as well. But
does it worry you sometimes to think that there are people from the north maybe going down south of the border, Dublin, maybe they're going further down to Kerry or whatever, and they're being told that they're not fully Irish, they're not really Irish. Well, yes, you say you're Irish, but you're from the north, so you're not as Irish as I am because I come from Kerry. And we all hear those stories anecdotally. Many of us, I mean, some of the people I was talking to in the office today have actually experienced that kind of comment. Does that bother you?
It doesn't bother me, because I know it's that factually true, and I know that, as I say, culture, history, everything's on its side. Of course, someone might be irritated and mightn't be long in correcting that particular individual of the error of their ways. Let's put it that way. But, you know, there are cultural differences everywhere. There are different cultural differences.
But I think that is a form of prejudice, because friends of mine in the south say if they are strident in a meeting, oh, you would say that because you're a northerner. You know, it's as if, you know, Northerners are angry people, etc. And I think this is a serious problem. And many of my friends, look, I've had this thing, and not everybody has said this to me in the South, but I've had this thing whenever you say, look, I'm from a Protestant background, and they say things like, are there any Protestant writers or poets or playwrights? And you say, well, of course there are, you know, like a lot of the ones who live in the South who come from that background. And these are serious things. I remember one night coming
and that was Jimmy's point that he
but I think, and I'm not saying that people don't do that, vice versa, it's not unique, but that is a prejudice. You know, why would you think that a community wouldn't have playwrights and poets? Yeah. Because you've got this sense of orangeism and, you know, right-wingism and stuff like that there. And I think, you know, that stereotype is important. But amusingly, one night when I was in Dublin, and my friend and I were wondering if we get a pint somewhere, and we were standing on O'Connell Bridge, and this young lad was in a Celtic top, and I said, excuse me, do you know what time it is? And he says, aye, time you went back to the north. Now, you know, that could be prejudice also in music. But I do think there is a thing where at times the Protestant community is understood from a very, very outdated position.
Oh, well, that's interesting you should talk about an outdated position, because I want to go back to Emer, and I wonder two things, Emer. Is this partly a generational issue, and has it changed significantly since, let's say, 1998 and the Good Friday Agreement? Are things better now than they were 2.5, 3 decades ago, do you think?
I'd actually go back further than that to maybe 1990 presidential election that my dad ran in. And I think it was a different time then. I think the Good Friday Agreement has definitely changed things. I think he found it hard at times during that election campaign to hear people think that he wasn't a real Irishman. But then you jump forward 7 years, and Mary McAleese won the presidency, and that was very symbolic and emotional for all of us. So I definitely think time has changed things. I don't agree that when people ask questions about the Unionist community or Protestant community, that it's prejudice. I think it's curiosity, and I think there's also a huge effort by people not to offend and not to say the wrong thing. And actually, we need to get over that. We need to encourage people to ask questions that maybe they're afraid to ask when they're coming from a good place. Because I definitely think that is a factor, that Southerners are afraid to offend, and Northerners are not, that they're not able to participate in debates about the North or have an opinion on the North in case they get it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Your father, Austin Curry, was a bit of a trailblazer back in 1990. And interesting, of course, we think about another Northerner who ran for president. That was Martin McGuinness. And when he ran to be president, he couldn't vote for the president at that particular time. And that's a whole other issue that we're not going to get into tonight. Mm-hmm. We have different healthcare systems, Jimmy. We have different social care systems. We have different education systems. We also have different cultural systems. And I was talking to Gary Lightbody on this programme from Snow Patrol a number of months ago now, I suppose it is, and he was making the point that the disparity in arts funding is a huge issue, and it doesn't help us understand each other better. Per capita in Wales, arts funding is £10. In the Republic, it's £20. In Northern Ireland, as you will know very well, it is £5.
It's actually 11 in Wales and 22 in Ireland.
Well, there you go. So those figures have changed. And it's still 5 in Northern Ireland.
I mean, the problem is when I moved here at first, I could actually see the sense of the union. It felt like, I mean, the NHS, as you talked about, my son had an eye problem. It cost us a lot of money down south. As soon as we moved up here, it was free, you know, and all that got sorted quite quickly. It was really, really good. As soon as Brexit hit, everything kind of went, you know, like, I mean, it didn't make any sense anymore. Purely because you had a vote where you're taken out of the European Union, you know, by, you know, a populace that wasn't actually here. And I found that very disturbing personally, you know.
Do you think that changed relationships between North and South?
Yeah, I think so.
In a real and meaningful way?
Yeah, and there's no two ways. Like, partition worked, right? Like, and the Troubles haunts the legacy, you know. But people are trying to get over it. And I think this is the whole thing about we're trying to, you know, we are going to be walking each other. Emer was right. Like, we need to be asking questions of each other. We can't be afraid of, you know, we don't, you know, it's not about being insulting or trying to find, you know, you want to find out more about the Unionist community. You know, we want to find out more about the nationalist community. I think that's really, really important. You know, I think that's a vital part of the conversation going forward, wherever it leads us.
Yeah.
So
we should Yeah, you would say we should read more books, we should watch more plays.
Yeah, and you talked about, like, the Abbey was set up by Protestants, which is the Yeats and Lady Gregory and stuff like that, and it's a huge legacy of where that went as well. You know, Shaw's, you know, Oscar Wilde, all of these came from an Anglo-Irish tradition, you know. We talk about the lyric, and in terms of, like, working class Protestants, you know, you have everybody from David Ireland to Gary Mitchell to Mary Jones, probably one of the most influential writers on the island, particularly in terms of comedy, like Stones in His Pockets is probably one
He's
of the
a working class East Belfast Protestant.
Totally, you know, and embraced by the whole island. You know, I think that's really important. You know, like, yeah, you know, like, currently at this moment in time, we have a play called The Man Who Swallowed a Dictionary, which is about David Irving. Yeah. You're talking about, like, one of the big things for me in the, you know, lead up to the Good Friday Agreement was listening to Irving speak really intelligently, really coherently, you know, from his Protestant Unionist background, you know, about what their objectives were, as opposed to the no, no, no all the time, which is... It was very off-putting, you know, and it's a tragedy he died so young. Play's great. It finishes on Saturday. Go see it.
Good plug. Chris Donnelly, can I just ask you if you think that there can, not necessarily always is, but can there be a class dimension to this issue? Middle-class people can move very easily across the border for education, to watch sport, for weekends away. It is not so straightforward for people with fewer financial resources at their disposal.
Isn't that always the way? No matter where we are.
But is it a factor?
Oh, I think it is a factor, because then it entrenches people's own stereotypes, unfortunately. But we don't have to look across the border. We have that within our own city here in Belfast, the same thing. I think this is a great conversation, and it's very important, and I would be very interested and believe that people north and south should get to know each other more. However, I think it would be a very serious mistake to try to read across that in terms of any constitutional implications. And I think that was what Mark Hennessy was kind of implying there. See, at the end of the day, if knowledge or relative ignorance of a people about others sharing a jurisdiction was a factor, this jurisdiction would not be in the United Kingdom, because people in Great Britain don't have great knowledge about Northern Ireland, number one. And I think number two, you know, there was a message that Mark Hennessy gave there, you know, people in the south, if they're asked about giving up their flag, giving up their anthem, you know, those types of conversations, people in Great Britain never gave up their flag or anthem taking on Northern Ireland. So I think there are serious conversations going to be had about unity moving forward. Okay. And people, constitutional change can happen a long time before relationships north and south of people getting to know each other or further advanced.
I wish we had more time, because I think there's an awful lot more that we could talk about tonight, but maybe it's a subject, well, I would say it definitely is a subject that we'll return to in the weeks and months ahead. We need to leave it there for now, folks. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us tonight. Now, it's our biggest natural resource and one of the most challenging and most visible problems currently facing the executive. We're all familiar with the blue-green algae that's taken hold of Lough Neagh. The man tasked with cleaning it up is the Environment and Agriculture Minister, Andrew Muir. So when he came into the studio earlier this evening, I wanted to know how soon we can expect to see results.
It's very easy in Northern Ireland to lament the problem. It's much harder to own the solution. And as I said, in terms of, for example, the Nutrients Action Programme, these are significant interventions in terms of farming, which I'll be looking to make. And I will be outlining the reason why we're doing that, but also the case for those interventions. And we need funding to back this. And that's why I've been engaging heavily, not just with the Finance Minister, but also in terms of the UK Government and the DEFRA Secretary, because we need funding to fix the situation.
Are we talking about a blue-green mess in Lough Neagh and elsewhere? Because it migrates, of course, for 30 years. Is that what you're telling people we've got to be prepared for?
That's potentially the situation.
30 years? 30,
there's decades in the making, decades in the fixing. So I think it's really, really important in politics to be honest with people. Now, if Lough Neagh, and as you said, other situations in terms of Lough Erne and other places where blue-green algae has emerged is not a wake-up call for anyone in Northern Ireland, and I don't know what else is. And I want to also be clear around this, that there's been a lot of comment in terms of going for growth and what has contributed to that. Now, that was essentially a marketing term for a government policy over decades, which was favouring intensification. And that's had real consequences, which we're talking about here tonight. But also, we need to invest in wastewater infrastructure. It is not tenable that we have a situation where we're continuing to pollute our waterways with sewage, and also we're having housing and economic development constrained because of the situation in terms of wastewater. I also want to say one thing in addition to that. I cannot look farmers in the eye and say to them that I want to look towards taking actions around agricultural runoff, whilst NI Water have a separate regulatory regime. And I want to call time on that. I've asked my officials to review that, and we need to take a much more robust approach to sewage pollution in Northern Ireland. I was with an angling group here today in Antrim, and talking to them about the impact of fish kills, and they were very clear to me that we need to review fines and penalties around environmental crime. And that's where I'm going to make it very clear in terms of that consultation Naomi and I are going to be doing, that we need to look at this whole issue, and we need people to step with us in terms of the actions that are needed.
You mentioned wastewater just a moment ago. We'll come on to talk about that a bit more in just a moment or two. But what about drinking water? Because on Friday we heard from residents in Tyrone who say their tap water has a rank and mouldy taste. NI Water says that the water isn't harmful, but you would imagine surely that decent quality tap water is the least that residents deserve.
Entirely agree, Mark. And the situation we've got ourselves in Northern Ireland with regards to our environment is shameful.
But are those residents going to have to put up with that for 30 years?
No, they shouldn't. And that's why we need to be able to invest in our wastewater, but also drinking water infrastructure in Northern Ireland. Now, the Public Health Agency have made it clear that there is need for no restrictions in relation to this, but that doesn't deal with the concerns that are arising from this.
Yeah, would you say that people shouldn't have to deal with rank and mouldy water or rank and mouldy tasting water? Of course they shouldn't have to. The question is, are they going to have to?
Well, this is something I'll work with my colleague John O'Dowd, who's Minister for Infrastructure and has got lead responsibility for Northern Ireland Water. We want to find a situation where we're turning this around, and I will engage with him over the time ahead around these issues. But what I've seen here in the last number of months since I've taken up post is we've let our environment get into a really desperate state. And I'm glad to see that it's reflected in terms of the programme for government as a commitment. But that needs to be matched in terms of the actions required, and that also requires funding.
Just to be absolutely clear, because I think you've said quite a lot, but I want to be absolutely clear for the benefit of people who are affected by this and who are watching this programme tonight. Are you suggesting that there are residents in certain places in Northern Ireland who might have to put up with what they describe as rank and mouldy tasting tap water for 20 or 30 years? Is that a possibility?
That shouldn't be a possibility. We need to address the issue. We need to do further research so we can actually deal with these issues so that is not occurring. This is a primary responsibility for the Department of Infrastructure and for my colleague John O'Dowd, who leads in terms of Northern Ireland Water. And we should be doing all we can to address this.
As far as the future of Northern Ireland Water is concerned, in October 2021, in an Assembly debate on wastewater and sewerage, when you were your party's infrastructure spokesperson, you said, and let me just quote you, "We need to urgently consider the mutualisation of Northern Ireland Water. That is a clear, positive solution that the Alliance Party brings. Welsh Water provides a track record of success in that regard." Now, mutualisation would mean the assets of Northern Ireland Water being transferred to a company which would, in theory, be owned by the people of Northern Ireland. Is that still your position today as an executive minister?
That's the Alliance Party position. I'm here today and tonight as Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs.
Yeah, but you're an Alliance MLA.
I'm an Alliance MLA, and I'm very clear what our position is, and it's been espoused by my colleagues in the Assembly around this. What I can say is that there was significant discussion in the Executive this morning around the issue of wastewater infrastructure and how that needs to be a priority going forward. And I will work with John as a colleague how we can take this forward. But our party position is very clear in terms of the mutualisation of NI Water, and it's something that as a party we will continue to espouse.
That's going to be a challenge because John O'Dowd is, as I understand it, implacably opposed to mutualisation because he says it will inevitably lead to household charges. So are you going to continue to push him to think again?
I will push John O'Dowd, and as I will push everyone who is responsible for anything that's contributing to water pollution in Northern Ireland to bring forward solutions. But we have to do this together, and that's why I'm working with John, I'm working with farmers, I'm working with others in Northern Ireland to try to find solutions to this. But we don't have time on our side, and that's why there was significant discussion in the Executive this morning around the issue of wastewater infrastructure, and we need to focus upon solutions because the current model is not working.
OK, well, John O'Dowd says mutualisation won't work, privatisation he's absolutely not interested in. He says developers need to pay.
Well, let's see what he can bring forward in relation to that. I'm not aware of any significant developments in terms of that, and John O'Dowd does need to bring forward further proposals in relation to this. But I want to say again, I'm committed to working with people in relation to this because that's the best way forward.
Yes, well, it is if you can agree on what actions need to be taken and if you have the funding available to you to actually act upon them. I mean, if you don't agree and you don't have the money, you're stuffed.
There's lots of challenges in this role. It's not lost upon me when the ministers were being picked, it was the last one available. So I know the challenges here.
Did it feel like a hospital pass? Does it feel like a hospital pass now more than it did back in February?
No, I enjoy this role, funny enough, because it's an opportunity to make positive difference to people. It's about being also honest with people around the challenges that are there, but it is also about looking towards solutions around this. And the fact that the executive, we're discussing this today and we're looking towards how we can take this forward. We all as political parties have different positions, but we're in a power-sharing executive, and what we've got to do is work forward together in relation to these matters. And I know these issues are significant, and I will be very clear in terms of the environment. And I talked earlier in terms of the regulation of Northern Ireland water. My view is that the arrangements which are known as which give a separate regime for regulation of any water, are not fit for purpose. I want to call time on Sorpy, and I want to look towards putting Northern Ireland water on the same par as any other polluters in Northern Ireland.
Just one final thing I want to ask you about. A few weeks ago, I spoke to Dennis Bradley as part of our Red Lines podcast series, and during that conversation he was extremely critical of the Alliance Party for not doing enough to encourage a debate about the constitutional future of this place. I know you listened to that conversation with interest. He's not saying Alliance needs to take a position on the constitutional issue one way or the other, just that you should be helping to facilitate that debate. What's your response to his comments?
So Dennis wouldn't exactly be a fan of the Alliance Party from his recent articles.
Clearly not.
No. The issue around the constitutional status of Northern Ireland is an active debate. The Alliance Party are quite happy to engage in relation to that. But from some of the musings from Dennis, they seem to reflect life a long time ago, back in 1998. And Northern Ireland's moved way beyond that, and it's been reflected in Dairy Girls. And thankfully, life today is very different than it was then. And we live in a society which is very diverse, and we're not defined just by our national or constitutional identities. We're defined by many other things. And I think it's a rich society that we're in, and Alliance Party are happy to engage in that discussion. We're also happy to engage in other discussions, as we've been doing tonight, in terms of the environment, which is a key issue for people.
But he says that this is very much a conversation of today, 2024, and he says that without any risk to itself, the Alliance Party could facilitate that conversation, because whether you like it or not, and whether you choose ultimately to take a position on the constitutional future of this place or not, that is a conversation that is happening and needs to be encouraged if we are to move forward positively. Does he not make a fair point?
We're happy to engage in that discussion, but it's not the only discussion in town. There's many other issues that are facing people in Northern Ireland. We have a situation with regards to people who are pushed into poverty. We have a crisis in terms of our environment. We have a situation with regards to healthcare, and particularly mental health care. It's something raised often with me. So we're happy to engage in those discussions. It's not something that defines me. And something I'm happy to discuss with other people. There's merits of all the different arguments that are put forward, but it's not what the Alliance Party is about, and people need to get their head around that. The Alliance Party is made up of many different people from very different strands of life who have different opinions, and I think that's our strength.
Environment Minister Andrew Muir talking to me earlier. By the way, you can listen to that full conversation I mentioned with Dennis Bradley on our Red Lines podcast. That's available now on BBC Sounds. But that's it for tonight. I'll be back at the weekend with Sunday Politics at the usual time of 10 o'clock on BBC One, when we'll be discussing the DUP and Labour Party conferences. Until then, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Good night.